The title of today's message is You Are Sent. And what we're going to be doing is talking about living in the call of Jesus as sent ones, okay? And what I want to talk to you about today is the whole of Matthew chapter 10, and I want to help you kind of reframe discipleship, because I think this is what Matthew 10 really does for us. Matthew chapter 10 really forces us to rethink what discipleship is about altogether. Because if you go back to the very end of that memory verse that we've been working on together, at the end of chapter 9, what you see is, Jesus is saying to his disciples, hey, you guys look out, look at the crowds. There's so much opportunity for, God's redemptive work here. Look up at Memphis, Tennessee. Look up at your classes, and look up in your clinic rooms, and look up in your workplaces, and look up at your neighbors. Don't you see there's so much redemptive work that is possible? There's need and there's opportunity. The harvest is plentiful. And don't you see, guys, gals, the laborers are few. There's not many who are willing to do this. And so I'm asking that you pray. We talked about this last week. You pray and ask that God would send more laborers. But then notice what happens as we get into Matthew chapter 10, verse 1. And again, as Matthew writes, he didn't put in the chapter numbers and the headers, okay? So you've got to make a connection. And this is what forces us to rethink discipleship altogether, because as Jesus is saying, hey, pray and ask for more laborers, he also looks at those who he's saying, ask for more laborers, and he goes, hey, by the way, it's you. And in Matthew chapter 10, he called his 12 disciples to him, and he actually sends them out. We see in verse 1 how he gathers them up. And then in verse 5, if you look forward in your Bible, we'll read the whole text in just a second, but if you look forward at verse 5, the scripture says, these 12 that he called to himself, he actually then goes, hey guys, by the way, we're talking about the laborers being needed and the laborers being few. I'm looking at you and actually you're the laborers. So let's go. And he commissions them. And he just says, guys, go. Just go. You are sent. And it's causing them, and it causes us to rethink what discipleship is about altogether. It's not just about receiving from Jesus, but it's also giving of what we have received. He's asking them to kind of shift their identity of themselves as to be sent ones. He's saying, you are the ones. You're the laborers that I'm calling. Go, let's go. You are sent. Now, I know today, 2025, all right? This is not just another, standard preachy sermon about being missional, all right? We're in this series talking about bringing the real us to the real Jesus, all right? And I know, and you know, that today, many Christians today struggle with this concept of being sent. We live, let's be honest, in a very comfort-driven, safety-first culture. Would you agree with that? We do. If you're not aware of it, you need to be, because part of this passage is going to challenge some of that comfort-driven, safety-first mentality as he asks us to embrace an identity as sent ones. Most people, perhaps even you today, tend to view your faith as a private thing rather than something to be shared. A few things we don't talk about in America, right? You don't want to mess up Thanksgiving dinner talking about what? Politics, religion, or Saints versus Chiefs. Chiefs versus Eagles. I don't even know the game tonight. Sports, perhaps. I don't know. Y'all can see how much of an NFL fan I am. I'm going for the commercials, all right? But yeah, there's a few things that are taboo topics, right? There are things that we go, we best not kind of bring that up. And Jesus is going to challenge that as we read the text today, as we embrace this identity as sent ones. I know that there are lots of social pressures that we face, right? You know it. There are a lot of reasons why we kind of fear being rejected, and it really keeps us from being more bold in our conversations toward Jesus, even though he's everything to us as Christians. Even though we really do believe, our lives are owed to his grace. We really do desire for others to know him and be redemptive, experience his redemption. we still struggle because we wonder like, oh man, like if I go there, there's a cost, a social cost, and it is going to be challenged today by Jesus in ways. And I also know that as we've talked about this idea of global missions, and in last week's, Tad told me we had a breakfast together this week, and he said, first thing he said, Barrett, new record last Sunday. I said, really? He said, I think it's the longest you've ever preached. I was like, well, God's great. I'm very proud of myself. And I'm glad Global Missions got the longest sermon that Barrett's ever preached. But if you were here, congratulations. You endured. But we've been talking ad nauseum about the needs of the world. And sometimes this idea of reaching out globally like that can feel out of reach for us, or it even feels like for this special class of people, this like elite, heroic group of people, rather than something that we're to be a part of too. And Matthew chapter 10, and by the way, before I move on from this list, can I just, if you put it back up for me for just a second. Can you guys bear witness to this? Does this resonate with you in any way? Some of y'all kind of understand this even from your personal experience. My guess is at least 1, 2, 3, perhaps this is where you live. And what I am asking you to do is open yourself to Jesus today, because what Jesus is trying to do in Matthew 10 with his disciples, he's asking them to kind of rethink discipleship. What he's saying to them, and listen, this is really the main point of the sermon. It's very simple. The main point will be expanded on this just a little bit, but if you can get this one statement today, I'll keep saying it again and again and again, but if you can get this, then you're really getting what Jesus is saying today. To follow Jesus is to be sent. To follow Jesus is to be sent. What Jesus is trying to help reframe for the disciples, and what he's trying to help reframe in your life is, look, when you come into a relationship with me, like you are coming into a new kind of opportunity of purpose and passion and perspective of your life. You are a sent one. To follow me is to be sent by me. And yes, you receive from me, but you're also sent by me so that others might receive from me too. Being sent, and we titled this we've kind of themed these last weeks, and hopefully you've called onto it at some point or another because it's straight from the scripture. Being sent by Jesus is the mindset that every believer should have. So I am sent into my family. In the morning when I wake up my girls, I'm sent into their lives as their dad. As I come into relationship with my neighbors, I'm sent into relationship with them by Jesus. I'm sent into my clinics, or I'm sent into my campus. I'm sent into the opportunity to hang out with my friends who don't know him yet. I am sent. That is the identity that all of us should have. And the question I'm going to be asking you today is, how will you respond to this call to live as a sent one? All right? So, the title of today's message, You Are Sent, Living the Call of Jesus. And the main point this morning, I already kind of alluded to it, I told you to be expanded just a bit, is this: to follow Jesus is to live sent. Working with intentionality to help all people experience the redemptive grace of Jesus. Would y'all say this with me? To follow Jesus is to live sent. Working with intentionality to help all people experience the redemptive grace of Jesus. Matthew chapter 10 is where we're going to be today. And if you got your Bible, I'm going to start in verse 1. We're going to read the whole chapter, and we're going to talk through it together, verse by verse and theme by theme here, as we talk about what it looks like to live sent. Starting in verse 1, and I'll read from the ESV. And he called to him his 12 disciples, and he gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out, and to heal every disease and every affliction. Now the names of the 12 apostles are these: first, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, Go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. You received without paying, so give without money, without pay. Acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. And whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it, and stay there until you depart. As you enter the house, greet it, and if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or that town. For truly I say to you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. Behold, I'm sending you as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues. And you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, though, don't be anxious about what you're to speak or what you're to say. For what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against parents and have them put to death. And you'll be hated by all for my name's sake. But the one who endures until the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will have not gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. If they call the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they malign those of his household? So, have no fear of them. For nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say it in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. And do not fear those who could kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore. You are of more value than many sparrows. So, everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. Do not think, excuse me, that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. The one who receives a prophet because he's a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And the one who receives a righteous person because he's a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water because he is a disciple, truly, I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. You are sent, living in the call of Jesus. To be a disciple of Jesus is to be sent by Jesus, all right? Can y'all say that with me again? To be a disciple of Jesus is to be sent by Jesus. That's right. And Jesus here is helping us rethink what discipleship is all about, all right? So what I'm asking you this morning is just to journey with me through the text. It's a lot, right? And it is heavy. Anybody sense the heaviness and weightiness of the text? Imagine you being the disciples, right? Like he's basically saying, hey, like, do you see the crowds? Look at all the people who are harassed and helpless. And they're probably at that point going, yeah. Look at them. They're like sheep without a shepherd. And the disciples, yeah. Guys, the harvest is plentiful. And they're probably nodding, yeah. Like he's going, but the laborers are few. And they're going, yeah. So let's pray that God will send out more laborers into the harvest. Yeah. All right, those laborers are you. I say, what? And by the way, as you go, things are going to not be the easiest for you guys. And they're kind of looking around each other going like, is this for real? There's a weightiness. There's an excitement, but a weightiness of what Jesus is saying. But what he's trying to do, he's really driving us to greater dependence upon God and greater alignment with what life is all about anyway. And goodness gracious, don't we need it? We get so caught up here in the West. Life is about so many different things. But in the end, a lot of those things we give ourselves to just don't matter in the end. And Jesus is pushing us deeper into the heart of the Father to be more dependent upon him. But he's also aligning us toward things that really matter in the end. And he's saying, you got to see this. Staying close with me looks like living as sent ones of me. Now, there's a couple of aspects that I want to point out. We can't possibly, in one sermon, go through every single thing that's here in the text. Thankfully, this week, many CGs community groups will have opportunity to talk about it more. And at any point you ever want to discuss Scripture more, you know your pastors love you. We'll be glad to sit with you and talk more about anything that's hard to understand. But there's a couple of things I want to highlight this morning in today's sermon, all right, that are important for us to know. Number one, as we're sent, we got to understand something. We're sent by Jesus' authority, all right? We're sent with Jesus' authority. And this is really, really important. Really important for us to understand. Because Jesus gives more than a task. Jesus gives more than a task. He gives us the ability and the authority to do it. Okay? So what I'm trying to say here is some of us, we hear the mission and we just want to go, okay, I got to figure out how to do it. And Jesus is like, no, it's not for you to figure out how to do it. Like, actually, I will be the one that figures out how to do it. You just got to be dependent upon me. We see this in Matthew chapter 10, verse 1, as Jesus sends them out. It says here, there in verse 1, he gave them authority over unclean spirits. He gave them authority to cast out. He gave them authority to heal. He gave them authority over affliction. This is huge because what Jesus is saying is he's going, look, this is again repeated, remember in Matthew chapter 28, right before the Great Commission. He proceeds before he tasks them with something. He goes, look, don't forget this authority is my authority. All authority on heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go. Same framework here. Before they're sent out, he's saying, guys, I need you to know something. As you get to work, like, this is ultimately my work. I'm the one who's going to do the work. I'm sending you out to be my ambassadors, to be my sent ones. I want to work through you, but ultimately it's not your work to do, it's my work to do through you. And that changes the whole dynamic. What's really interesting is that Jesus calls ordinary people. Some of us struggle, I think, to live as sent ones because we have the mindset of like, well, but, right? We think of ourselves, if you know the story of Moses in Exodus, you remember when God tapped him on the shoulder and was like, hey, Moses, you're going to be the one that helps lead my people out of Egypt. And he's like, I think you got the wrong guy. Like, I think you got the wrong guy. Like, you may not know I have a stutter. And Moses started excuse making because he's basically going, I may not be the best one here. I'm not the most skilled. I don't have the greatest resume. I'm not even good at speaking in front of people. Like, you're sending me to Pharaoh to tell him to let the people out. I don't even know I could get out the sentence right. And God basically has to quiet Moses and goes, Moses, it's not about, dude, it's not about what you're bringing to the table. Although I love you and I see you as valuable, it's not about your giftedness and your ability and your power, your resume, your education. It's not about that at all. It's about just being willing and available for what I want to do through you, Moses. And Moses had come to a deeper place of surrender and had to come to understand that, wow, like, God doesn't just work with this elite, specially trained group. He works with ordinary people like me. And what's so beautiful about this passage, you guys, is as they're sent, Matthew is reminding us of who he's sending out. This is a ragtag group of folks. He gives these names of the 12 apostles, and as you go through there, you're reminded of their stories and where Jesus found them. A lot of them were fishermen. They're just ordinary workmen. Some of them were tax collectors. He names that with Matthew. I mean, these are ordinary guys. These are blue-collar workers. These are not guys that have been enrolled in rabbinical schools. They're not guys that have been out preparing for some special missionary assignment their whole life. They're not guys that others would look at them and go, wow, of course they'll succeed because they are just next level cream of the crop. No, these are a ragtag group of guys. What made them so powerful and effective in their ministry, as we fast forward through the Gospels and then look into the Acts and you look at how the world was literally changed out of what started with this group of guys, what made this group of guys so incredibly powerful was not their own power, but it was rather the fact that they were empowered by another. It was, in fact, the fact that they were empowered by Jesus. What gave them effectiveness and fruitfulness in ministry was not their resume or their training, although they did get trained by Jesus and they were close with him. But what gave them their effectiveness and fruitfulness was their recognition that they could not do it on their own, but Jesus could. Their dependence upon Jesus was their key to success. Abiding life with Jesus. If we belong to him, we have to see that we are empowered by him. We are. It's what Jesus says in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. He says, wait upon the Holy Spirit, and then you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. The promise is given that we would be filled with the Spirit of God. And as we're filled by the Spirit of God, that then we step out and they have the opportunity to minister in his name. If you go forward in the verses, he talks about how they should go nowhere except where they are sent. It begins to talk about how the priority first is for the house of Israel. Of course, we know that expands outward. It's Jerusalem first, the Israelites first, God's redemptive heart for them. Jesus came for the Jewish people, but he also came for more than the Jewish people. But as a Jewish man, the gospel started there in Israel, but then it expanded outward from there. So he gives them these instructions, but then he goes on in verse 7, it says, and proclaim as you go, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. They're witnessing to another. They're not witnessing to themselves. They're saying, like, God is doing something. And the opportunity for redemption is here. They're pointing to another. And then he gives them these instructions to walk in these things that up to this point, they've only seen Jesus do. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, cast out demons. Now, if you're the disciples that day, I would have loved to have a video camera on them. Wouldn't that have been hilarious? What do you think their faces look like as he's going, all right, guys, heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out the demons? You can imagine them looking over to each other, right? Going, is he serious? How? Simon, how the heck are we going to do that? They're looking at each other going, wait, what? Even today, 2025, as I think about being sent into relationships with people who don't know the Lord, and I know what God's desire for them is, to be saved. And I know God's desire is to use me as a part of that process. But if I'm honest, and I think if you're honest, sometimes we look at each other and go, like, how am I going to do that? Like, for real, though. Like, how can I, like, connect to some of these, like, bigger things? Like, how, like, seriously? Like, I'm going to be a part of that? And friends, I just want to say this morning, if you ever feel inadequate as a sent one in the mission of Jesus, then I've just got to tell you, you are in good company. You are in good company. I feel inadequate too. I feel inadequate. That's why I spend most of my Sunday mornings praying before I get up here, because every single Sunday, it has not changed for 14 years. Every single Sunday that I stand up here, I go, God, I don't know how I can do anything in the hearts of your people today. I feel inadequate week after week. If you feel inadequate, you're in good company, and it's because every disciple before you has also felt inadequate, going back to these first 12. And the reason we feel inadequate is because we are. We are inadequate to do these things. Those 12 disciples were inadequate to do these things. I am inadequate to see redemption come to those who I love the most in my family and in my neighborhood and my circles. I'm inadequate. Those who we've been talking about recently, going out from our church into North Memphis or going out from our church into Eastern Europe, like we talked about a few weeks ago, they are inadequate to accomplish these bigger visions of the redemptive mission of Jesus. So if you're feeling inadequate, you're in good company, because you are. But here's the good news of the gospel. Jesus' authority and ability is greater than your limitations. Jesus' authority is greater than our limitations. It just is. He's not asking you to be adequate. He's asking you to trust that he is adequate and to step out in what he can do with prayerfulness and dependence upon him. These guys look at each other going, heal the sick. How are we going to do that? And they'll learn the hard way. We'll look at it as we continue to go to the gospel. There's times where they can't do it. And they come back to Jesus and they're like, it just doesn't work. We said the same words that you said when you healed the guy, but our words don't work. And Jesus will look at them at times and he go, guys, this one is a hard one. You try to cast out the demon and that didn't work. Well, it's because you've got to depend on me. And he's gently correcting them to go, it's not about the words you recite. It's not just about the ability you have. It's about dependence upon me. This happens through prayer and fasting. This is yearning for what I can do. But when you live that way as a sent one, when you learn to live based on what he can do, man, you really get to see his authority and his abilities. It's really just about his name. It's just about his power. It's just his mission. It's just quite as simple as that. We are sent out with simplicity of the empowerment of Jesus himself. So, as he sends us, you are sent. To be a disciple is to be sent by Jesus, right? But as he sends us, what we've got to learn is that we're sent with his authority. Now, before I move to the next one, what I want to ask you to reflect on is this. How often in your life, honestly, do you wait to feel ready before stepping into obedience? How often is it that perhaps you're not stepping into obedience because you think that there's something more needed other than just dependence upon Jesus, right? What I would ask you to just consider is, what if readiness was not the core issue? What if willingness is? Okay, it's going to take some time for you to think about this, perhaps talk about it this week with your groups. But what if, just be curious with me and be curious before the Lord. What if readiness was not the core issue to why you're not engaging in his redemptive mission? What if readiness was not the core issue with your witness to your family members? Or your witness to your neighbors, or you're stepping in to see some of the great and awesome things that you really believe and desire for God to do in people's lives around you. What if readiness was not the core issue? What if really willingness is? The reason I say that, because it's about what Jesus can do, not you. So we got to learn that we step out in his authority. Number 2, every disciple, right, is sent by Jesus. To be a disciple of Jesus, to be sent by Jesus. And number two, part of what that means is we've got to learn, as we are sent, to rely on God's provision. All right? And not only do we rely on his power, we talked about that in his authority, but we rely on his provision. And we're going to see this in verses 9 to 15. But what I want to show you here is, as I've been talking about, but it's going to get more practical here, Jesus instructs us as his disciples to go out in radical dependence. Radical dependence. This is kind of crazy, the way that Jesus looks up his disciples. And I mean, you can just imagine, right? Standing there that day, and he's looked at you and he's like, okay, I'm sending you out. I'm sending out my authority. I want you to know what I can do through you. And secondly, guys, you got to listen to this. You got to listen to this. He says in verse 7 to 8, he says, you're going to proclaim these things. You're going to do these things, but as you go, you received without paying, so you got to give without pay. In other words, like, you don't need to take anything with you. And he goes on in verse 9 and he says, I don't want you to take gold. I don't want you to take silver. I don't want you to take copper. I don't even want you to take extra clothing and staffs or sandals. Like, look, you just got to go just bare bones. No extra money, no backup plan, nothing. How would y'all feel about that? My goodness, my granddad, he won't even step out of the house without like 3 $100 bills hidden in his wallet. You know what I'm saying? How would you feel? Have you ever gotten out of the house and you realize you don't have your credit card or you don't have your phone? You ever done that? Y'all are way more responsible than me, I guess. All right? Yeah, it's kind of a helpless feeling if you've ever been there. And you're like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And I can imagine the disciples in some ways were kind of thinking that. It's like, oh my goodness, like, what am I going to do? And essentially what he's teaching here is he's saying, look, if you're going to be a part of being sent, the mission of Jesus requires faith in me. You got to have radical faith in me. And the reason this is so important, essentially what Jesus is trying to teach them is he's saying, I don't want for you to trust what is in your hands. I want for you to trust what is in mine. And I think sometimes we really do struggle with this, not just as we're living on mission, but really in all of life, don't we? So often when we allow things to kind of remain in our hands, we tend to trust those things more than we trust God. And God is intentionally saying to his disciples, hey, like, I want you to empty your hands. I want you to intentionally, like, divest yourself of things that you could depend on other than me. I don't want you to go with all of those trappings and those provisions. I don't want you to just get rid of everything but me, because ultimately I want you to trust what's in my hands. And I want you to trust that I'll provide. Hudson Taylor, great missionary, said this. He said, God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supply. And I really believe I have seen this to be true again and again and again. Trust God deeply and watch as he provides. And what's so interesting for these disciples is that the provision comes as they go. It's very interesting. It's not like, if you look back at the Old Testament, right? What a weird thing for like bread to fall down from heaven every day. Have y'all read those stories? You ever gone, that's kind of weird? Yeah. And it fell down just enough for that day. No more, no less, just enough for that day, except for that one day a week for the Sabbath. But look, I mean, just enough. So it took them to step out in faith. They had to go and trust God day by day, just enough for each day. Why do you think Jesus says, give us this day our daily bread? Because he would like for you to live much like the Israelites in the wilderness, where you're not heaping up storehouses that in the end don't matter much, thinking that your hope is in storehouses of grain, but rather your hope is in the faithfulness of God who will provide. He wants you to be loosened of things of this world so that day by day you can just trust him. That's what Jesus desires. You ever think about the story of the Israelites as they were going to cross the Jordan? They had to put their first foot in before they saw it part. We got to step out trusting God's provision. And if we know we're doing what God's called us to do, then we can be certain that God will provide for it. That's exactly what Jesus is saying. Provision comes as we go, and we're sent to rely on his provision. My question to you is, how often do we hesitate in obedience because we cannot see the whole plan? Anybody ever been there? Yeah? You'd like to have all of it figured out. Know that all of it is taken care of before you even take the first step. And that's not the way God works. He wants you to just believe him, to trust him, and to step out into what he's called you to. And as you're stepping into that by faith, he wants you to know that he will provide, and he will. He absolutely will. And I wonder, are we afraid to risk because we don't believe that he will provide? Some of us are called into things that require us to lose something. And some of us are fearful, I believe, to give up those somethings because we wonder if we give that up, if we're generous with our time, or if we're generous with our resources, if we're generous with actually sacrificing something that feels like we need, and we wonder how will we go without that. I think sometimes we hold on to things tightly because we're fearful that he will not provide on the other side. And Jesus is trying to loosen our grip, and he's saying, hey guys, like I'm sending you, you're sent ones, but you've got to trust in my provision. What would it look like for you to really believe that he's faithful to provide and to live simple and free? To be willing to just say, give us this day our daily bread. I know that you'll take care of the rest. What would it look like? What would that free you up in terms of being sent by him and living redemptively on mission? Number 3, not only do we need to trust that we're being sent in his authority and sent in his provision, but number 3, we've got to see that we're being sent into opposition and suffering. This is kind of a hard part of the text. Did y'all hear all of that? This is kind of a hard part of the text. This is the part of the text where we go, excuse me? Wait, what? And then we start justifying, oh, that was for those early Christians. Surely this is an outdated, antiquated text. Anybody ever written these passages off and you've made yourself the exception? He's not talking about me, right? He's not talking about me, unless he is. Matthew 10:6, Jesus is clear. He says, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. He describes in verse 17, he says, be careful of men because they'll deliver you over. It's like an assumption, like, hey, like you're going to have people that are not going to like this, and they're going to come against you, and they're going to turn you over. And the assumption in verse 19, when they deliver you over. And then in verse 21, you're going to be hated by all for my name's sake. Like some people are not going to like you because you're with me. In verse 23, when they persecute you, it's an assumption. Down in verse 25, if they've called the master of the house Beelzebub, how much more will they malign those of his household? Guys, I don't really know how else to say it, but I'm just going to be kind of direct in saying it. If Jesus, if he were I was a marketing major in undergrad before God called me and purposed me. This marketing campaign sucks. If Jesus were building a marketing campaign, these are the absolute worst slogans you think he'd use. I guarantee you watch the Super Bowl tonight and watch the commercials, you're not going to see a commercial aired like this before they ask you to buy the product. This is terrible. Who wants to sign up for this? Hey, come, you come to me, everybody's going to hate you. You get put in prison, you might get killed. It's going to suck in the world. It's going to suck. But you get me? What? I mean, you gotta just know the disciples are just sitting there looking at him like, is he for real? Like, what? This would be a terrible marketing campaign. And yet, here's what I know, even just from my short history, but also from reading and being a student of church history. And yet, the church has never grown faster than in places where it costs the most to follow Jesus. You look around the world today in Iran. You look around the world today in China. You look around the world today in places even like Afghanistan. I know real-time reports the church is growing and flourishing in these places where people are hating them for following Jesus. I saw it myself when I was in West Africa. So there's something here for us to pay attention to. And I think the big thing for us to pay attention to, and for some, this might not be brand new news, but for all of us, it should be at least a reminder. Many lost people are resistant and hostile to the gospel because of what it demands. This is just a reality. A lot of people don't want to change. They don't want to be told that there's someone that they need to submit to, that God is real, or that he gets to define morality, that they do not, or life is owed to him. It requires submission and surrender when you go talking about Jesus Christ. And as appealing as the gospel is to so many others, they become resistant and hostile. And so what Jesus is trying to tell the disciples is, he's like, guys, and I'm trying to tell you, 2025, Memphis, Tennessee, even as we go around the world today, if you're going to share the gospel, you're going to get opposed. And that opposition is not a sign of failure, but faithfulness. There are going to be some people who you say, hey, can I pray with you? And they go, no. Hey, would you like to come to church with me? And they're going to go, no, that's dumb. And they might even look down on you or even poke at you for that. You might share the gospel with them, have an opportunity to help them know something of the goodness and the grace of Jesus, and they just outright reject you, and it changes your relationship because you went there in love for them. Opposition is going to happen. Hostility like that is just part of people. It's not personal toward you. It's really a rejection. It's personal toward Jesus. It's a rejection of him. But it's not a sign of failure. It's often a sign of faithfulness. And here's what this is me to you. This is also me pointing my fingers at myself and not just at you. Here's what I am saying. I think that in the West, we sometimes fear awkwardness more than we fear lostness. I think we have forgotten that Jesus told us it's going to be awkward. And so because it's awkward, we freak out. And yet Jesus says to us, it's going to be awkward. Like he looks you in the face, and as you live sent, it's going to be awkward. It's going to involve opposition and hostility and changes of relationships. I wonder if we've gotten to the point where we almost fear that awkwardness more than we fear the lostness. Because as I look at the passage, I don't know what else to read of it. You tell me what you see other than what I'm seeing. Jesus promises persecution. That's what I see. He promises it. What do you mean, Pastor Barrett? Where are you getting that? I'm getting that from verse 24 and 25, where Jesus says, you will be hated for my name's sake. As you step out in redemptive mission, he's promising there's going to be people who don't like you because you identify with me and you testify to me. So, because he's saying that's going to happen, then for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we should not be surprised when it begins to happen. We should not shrink back in fear when it begins to happen. We should not think something has gone wrong, like it's failure when it begins to happen. Here's what I'm trying to say. Because of what we know Jesus says is going to come, we've got to stop expecting ease, and we've got to start embracing boldness. And I'm not asking you to take on a bullhorn and go down on Bill Street and be one of those people, unless you sense a call to do that. I'm not asking you, when I say boldness, I'm not asking you, in your mind, you might have a straw man of what that looks like, and you go, oh no, I'm never going to do that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying to step out and courage a little bit more in the relationships of trust that you have to actually bring up Jesus, to actually care about someone's souls more than just sports talk, more than just political talk, more than just work talk. How about we have some soul talk? How about we corner people in our neighborhoods and just look them in the eyes and just say, how are you doing? And they say, oh, I'm good. And you can tell it's just a trite thing. And then you just pause a little bit and say, no, but how are you really? How about you invite somebody to the dinner table and just go there, learning their story and also being willing to share yours, but share the parts of your story that involve the grace and redemption of Jesus. I think we've got to stop expecting so much ease as we're sent ones, and we've got to start embracing boldness, because here's why. We have nothing to lose, but everything to give. Nothing to lose, but everything to give. And here's what I'm saying. What you have to give is life itself in Jesus Christ. You are bearing witness to the life of Jesus. He's packaging all this persecution talk, but he's saying, look, they're going to deliver you, like verse 17 and 18, they're going to deliver you to the courts, and it's going to be hard, and they're going to put you in front of all these things, these governors and kings, but you are going to bear witness before them and to the Gentiles. He's saying, don't be scared about what you're going to speak in verse 19 and 20, because the Holy Spirit is actually going to help you to know what to say. You're going to bear witness of the Father as you have opportunities. So yeah, things are going to get awkward. Things are going to get tense and hostile, but you have everything to give. Do you not see? These are the people that I came for. These are the people that I love. They're asking you to stand in front of them, to talk with them, and you get a chance to witness to them. You have everything to give, but friends, you have nothing to lose, because he says in verse 22, this is a promise to you that the one who endures to the end will be what? Will be saved. Even if things get to the point, which very few of us probably will ever get to the point of martyrdom, but even if things get to the point of martyrdom, and I would encourage you to read Fox's Book of Martyrs if you've never read it before. Read about people who have counted the cost and given their very life testifying to Jesus, and it will encourage you to do a little more in your own verbal witness here in the West, where very few of us will ever have to pay a cost that much, but he's worth paying that cost. But even if it came down to our very life being on the line, he says to us in verse 26, 27, he says, don't fear them. He says, do not fear these guys. Nothing is covered that will be revealed. Nothing's hidden that will be known. And he says in verse 28, do not fear them, because those who will kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. These verses were so precious to me when I moved to West Africa. I probably was not in any danger in my own life, but from a kid from middle Georgia who had never been overseas, when I stepped on that plane to go to West Africa, this is the day before a lot of the modern technology. And before Africa, where I was, there was no electricity, there was no internet, there was no phone communication. And we were surrounded by Muslim people, and I was told in Georgia that all of them wanted to kill Christians. So for me, which is misguided, by the way, but for me, stepping off the plane in Africa was a need to depend more deeply on the promises of Jesus than I've ever depended before. And I remember this passage coming into view in a way that I had never really seen it before, and holding on to these promises, remembering every day as I went out to share a gospel witness that my fear should not be primarily on the awkwardness, should not be primarily on what other people could do to me. I've got to maintain deep, deep trust in God and God alone. He says in verse 31, fear not, for you are more valuable than many sparrows. Everybody who acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. Jesus is saying, you are mine. I know the numbers of hairs on your head. Nothing can happen to you that I'm not in charge of. In the end, you are going to be okay. You have nothing to lose, but everything to give. So won't you step out and give a little more? Won't you live a little bit more as sent ones, even if it means, and especially as it means, opposition and suffering? The questions I ask for you before we move on is, what holds you back from sharing the gospel? Like, legitimately. What holds you back? What would it look like to have a little bit more courage? And where are we more afraid of discomfort than we are desperate for people to know Christ? I believe Jesus is trying to reframe discipleship here. He's saying, you are sent. Being a disciple of me looks like being sent by me. And some of you have thought something is like failure if there's opposition and suffering, and it's not. It's actually part of faithfulness, and you need to step into it a little more. You have nothing to lose, but everything to give. Fourth and finally, we see this instruction to be loyal to Jesus. As we're sent, we are sent to be loyal to Jesus. And in verses 34 to 39, we see that Jesus requires full surrender, but he also promises full reward. Full surrender. The paradox of Christianity is here, and we close looking at this. Verses 34, 35, he says, don't think that I've come to bring peace to earth. I've not come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to set a man against his father, a daughter against mother, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be of his own household. Whoever loves his father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves his daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. But whoever finds his life will lose it. And whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Lose your life and find it. This is the paradox of Christianity. Whoever loses his life to Jesus actually finds life itself in Jesus. Whoever gives themselves to this redemptive purpose and mission and gets lost in it actually finds a life that's aligned with the purpose and mission that in the end really matters. The world says to us, hold on to your dreams. Make it all about you. Build your own kingdom. Keep it safe. Jesus says, let it all go. Build mine. Risk it all. And I would ask, as you watch those worldly Super Bowl commercials tonight, you old scoundrels, just kidding. But I would ask you, evaluate, as the world tries to sell to you, which one actually leads to life? Which of those two offerings, the invitation of the world or the invitation of Jesus, which one actually leads to life? What do you want to lose your life for? Something that in the end leads to nothing, or something that in the end leads to everything? If you're going to give yourself to something, may you give yourself to the thing that in the end is the real something, is life itself. C.T. Studd, great missionary, said, if Jesus Christ be God and died for me, then no sacrifice can be too great for me to make for him. I was sitting this week at missionary commissioning for two of our church members who will commission soon as a local church. They got appointed by their organization this week, and I was sitting on the second row, it wasn't the very front. First Baptist Church, Charleston. The wood on the floor of that sanctuary was installed in 1699, and it's still there to this day. It was the church there in the South that had one of the very first international missions offerings ever given. They gave it to William Carey in 1804. was a church that started a women's missionary club. They sold baked goods for the first time and recorded in America to help sponsor international missionaries. And it was one of the first churches to ever send a missionary overseas. They sent to China in the early 1800s, a family who stood, I was watching, and they brought attention to it, but stood on the very floor of that church where missionaries were standing to be sent in 2025, just this past Wednesday. And there was a missionary family that was sent there in the early 1800s who went to China the first year that they were there. It was a mom and dad, and it was 3 young children from that church. The first year they were in China, the mom got ill and died. And the family was a total wreck. And they ended up coming back home for a period to kind of regroup. But the daughter, one of those 3 girls, recognized something really special, that her mom's life was not a waste, that her mom's life lived for the glory of Jesus for the people of China was not a waste at all. And she was so moved by what her mom had done in great sacrifice as she matured to understand it, great sacrifice for the people of China and the glory of God there, that she herself went back to China and in the shadow of her mother's grave lived most of the rest of her life seeking to win the people of China. If Jesus Christ be God and died for me, there's no sacrifice too great for me to make for him. And I was hearing this story and contemplating on it as I was sitting beside 2 sets of parents, the parents of our missionary couple that we're about to send to Eastern Europe. And I sat there holding their hands through the service because as they heard of their son and daughter on stage testifying to what God had called them to do, while we were all there to celebrate, there's also a cost to it, isn't there? And one of the moms looked at me and said, "They're my best friend." And I said, "Y'all are incredible for doing what you're doing, sending overseas." And they said, how could we not want to do this if we walk with the Lord? If Jesus Christ be God and died for me, no sacrifice could be too great for me to make for him. Embracing loss for gain. Whoever loses his life will find it. And I just wonder, as we close, what are we afraid to lose for Jesus? Is there anything? What might there be to keep us from full surrender? Jesus is offering us even to lay our own families down. He's saying, you can't be my disciple unless you're full surrendered. Full surrender. That's what Jesus invites us toward. So as we close today, I just go back to our main point. I just tell you, to follow Jesus is to live sent. It's to work with intentionality to help all people experience the redemption and the grace of Jesus. And he calls his disciples to himself, like I'm looking at you today, and he's looking them in the eyes and he's saying, hey guys, just go. Go. You are sent. This is what I want for you. I want you to go out. As you've received, go and give. You are sent. Understand the mindset shift. To be follower of me looks like to be sent by me. And I wonder this morning, how will you respond to the call?